What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about 8 players to let your idiot league mates draft this year in fantasy football. So essentially, 8 players I'm just much lower on than consensus and would prefer to fade. I don't hate these players personally, I just think their value doesn't really line up with my expectations for them heading into this season. If you guys enjoy the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. Questions, comments, feel free to drop them down below. If you want to defend one of these players, I would love to hear the case down below in the comments. But we are going to start it off with someone who I have been extremely high on pretty much throughout their entire NFL career, and that is going to be Devon Achane. He's going off the board as the consensus 110, the running back 6, and I have him as my 204, my running back 9. And like I said, this is someone who I have been extremely high on. I think Devon Achane is an incredible player. I have been way higher on him than consensus every single season. I mean, coming out of college, I loved him as a rookie pick in dynasty drafts. I loved him as a rookie in terms of his ADP. Going into year 2, going into year 3, every year I've had a very high, share of Devon Achane on my fantasy football teams, and he's 100% delivered. He's been the running back 5, 6, and 5 in PPR points per game. He's coming off his best fantasy season, averaging 20.2 points per game. He combined his year 1 efficiency with his year 2 receiving upside, averaged 5.7 yards per carry, caught 67 passes for 488 receiving yards. And I'll frame it this way. If Devon Achane was in a different situation, and say he just swapped places with Amari and Hampton, he was following Mike McDaniel to the Chargers, at the very worst, I would have Devon Achane as my running back 4, and I would probably have him as my running back 3 ahead of a guy like Christian McCaffrey. That is how highly I view Devon Achane. Me fading him this year has everything to do with his offensive situation, which unfortunately is pretty huge when it comes to fantasy production for running backs. And this Dolphins offense just looks really rough on paper, pretty much all around. You look at the change in quarterback, and I think it's totally reasonable to be higher on Malik Willis than you were on Tua last year. The difference is that despite Tua not being a good NFL quarterback or a good NFL starter, he was still pretty decent in terms of just feeding Devon Achane checkdowns, where Tua had zero mobility. He was not going to scramble. He was not going to turn dropbacks into rush attempts, or he wasn't going to get outside the pocket and make plays down the field. If there was any sort of pressure coming his way, he was dumping it down to Devon Achane, and we saw that through Tua's pretty low, 6.8 air yards per attempt, whereas Malik Willis is someone who can get outside the pocket. He can extend plays, and when he extends plays, he's going to take off using his legs, or he's going to, throw the ball deep down the field. Last year, obviously small sample size, 35 pass attempts, but his air yards per attempt was above 10. In 2024, it was at 8. And so just from like a quarterback archetype perspective, I think Tua was a lot better at actually getting Achane involved through the air. Then you look at the coaching element of this. Mike McDaniel, say what you want about him as a head coach, his leadership, his personality, all of these things. I don't think you can deny that Mike McDaniel was fantastic when it came to, maximizing the skill set of Devon Achane. I don't think there are many offensive minds out there who would have just pretty much went all in on Achane being the clear number 1 and given him this type of workload, given his kind of smaller stature at the position. And Bobby Slowick was on the staff last year, and so I don't think he's going to, try to reinvent the wheel here with Achane. But I do think at the very least it is a downgrade in terms of Achane's play caller. And even with the other stuff, like Mike McDaniel was still leading pretty good offenses with not a lot of talent on them. And then you're looking at the weapons outside of Achane, and I think some people might use this as like, Achane is going to be the focal point of the offense. He's going to be force-fed. He's going to get so many targets, but you still want to have a competent offense around him. And I just don't know if you're going to have that with weapons like Malik Washington, Chris Bell, Caleb Douglas, Kevin Coleman Jr., Jalen Tolbert, Tutu Atwell, Greg Dulcich, Will Kazmarek. Like the weapons, the pass catchers on this offense are truly terrible. This is a bottom 5 offensive line. The Dolphins have the second best odds to have the fewest wins in the NFL. And so I'm looking at a running back who thrives on efficiency, big plays, receiving usage. And I think he's going to be on a run heavy offense that is not putting up points, that is not going to be efficient. And yes, he might get peppered with targets, but they're still not projected to be a high volume passing attack. And so is Achane going to be able to score 10 plus touchdowns like he has in his first 3 years on good efficiency while also improving in the receiving department? I just don't think so. And I think this is the worst offensive situation he's been in, since he's been in the league. And this is the highest he's being drafted in fantasy. So I kind of think this is a situation of some people were kind of late to the party on Devon Achane. And now that maybe the production is going to take a dip, people are paying a premium for him. So it's unfortunate. I love him as a player, but I am expecting him to kind of fall off a little bit in terms of his production. And he's just not even really someone I'm considering at all towards the back end of the first. If you want to take him in round 2, I think that's fine. 110, I really just cannot get around on, unfortunately, for Devon Achane. Now, the next player I'm going to talk about here is another running back. And this is actually another player who, I just want to be in on. It's Cam Skattebo. He is the consensus 401, the running back 19. I have him around later in my rankings as my 503, my running back 21. And like I said, I wanted to be in on him. I think he's a fun player. He had a great rookie season, 16 points per game in the 8 games he played in, 19.1 points per game if you're taking out the first and last one. First game just wasn't super involved, still working his way into the offense. Last one left early with that season-ending injury. So when he was on the field getting meaningful snaps, he was awesome for fantasy. And he has a super fantasy-friendly skill set. He's this big physical goal line back who can, have a lot of touchdown upside, but he also is a tremendous pass catcher, can play on third downs, can pass block, all of those things. Now, there were always going to be concerns drafting Skattebo this year. I mean, he's coming off a super serious season-ending injury, ankle dislocation, fractured fibula, ruptured deltoid ligament, and he was already not some sort of super freaky athlete. Now, you could take that one of two ways. It could be, a positive spin that he was never super reliant on being crazy fast or insanely elusive. But it could also be he was already, had question marks about that peak athleticism. And now if it's even worse, what type of player is he going to be going into this season? But I still kind of had the idea that even if he wasn't the exact same player he was last year, and he was maybe 80, 85% of the guy we saw in 2025, I still felt like in this potential split with Tyrone Tracy, he was still going to be the best option to take those important touches, working in on the goal line, getting those third down snaps, being involved as a pass catcher. And, it might seem crazy to some people, but the Najee Harris signing does kind of scare me. And this is not me making the case that Najee's some sort of great player and that he's going to come in and be the running back 1. I mean, he wasn't great last year. He's now coming off an Achilles tear. But I do think that if Skattebo doesn't fully bounce back, Najee Harris is going to be an adult in this running back room. He can play on third downs. He can get some of those goal line looks. This is also a new coaching staff who is not as connected to Cam Skattebo. And so I do think now with Najee coming in, you are banking on Skattebo being a legitimately good running back and truly earning a big role as opposed to just kind of walking into one based on the situation. And if you feel good about that bet at the 3-4 turn, then take them. To me, I just don't. I think there are other running backs in this range that I would prefer. I would take DeAndre Swift straight up, and he's going a little bit later per consensus ADP. So those are my concerns with Cam Skattebo. Just not a fan of him at that 3-4 turn anymore after the Najee Harris signing. The next player I want to talk about is at the quarterback position, and this is someone who I actually talked about, I think, in yesterday or the video 2 days ago, some of the takeaways from Vegas. And Lamar Jackson, for me, is kind of a player I'm just fading here. So he's the consensus 405, the QB2 off the board. I have him over a round later in my rankings as my 509, also the quarterback 2, but just relative to the other positions, I'm much lower on him. And I fully get the case for Lamar. He arguably has the highest ceiling at the quarterback position. He has multiple QB1 seasons in points per game. I just think this year in 2026, the quarterback position is in such a strong spot. There's a lot of quarterbacks that you can talk yourself into their upside. There's also a lot of depth. And you just have to pay a real premium for Lamar that I'm just not really comfortable paying. He's going, a full round before Drake May and Joe Burrow. He's going 2 rounds before Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts. And when I reference back to that Vegas video I did looking at the projections, Vegas just doesn't think there really should be any gap between some of these quarterbacks. Josh Allen stands out as the clear-cut QB1, way out projects all of these other guys. But then you get to Lamar and you have this gap, and Drake May's projected more fantasy points than Lamar Jackson, going around later. Jalen Hurts going multiple rounds later, projected more fantasy points. Daniels is projected lower, but basically Lamar is being drafted like he is the clear-cut QB2, and I'm just not fully sold on that. Neither is Vegas. Now, if you were to guarantee me a healthy Lamar Jackson season, then sure, I would have him as the clear-cut QB2. Maybe I'd consider him in the middle of the 4th round. But I am kind of worried about his durability and then also his ability to play through some of those injuries. He is entering his age 30 season. And last year, I'm not saying it's going to be a repeat, but he dealt with a hamstring injury. And then when he got back, he was unplayable. He averaged 13.5 points per game over a 9-game sample. Like, truly killed you down the stretch if you were trying to start him in your lineup. And it's just with his play style, how reliant he is on his legs as he gets older and some of these, soft tissue injuries maybe become more and more common. I don't have the confidence that he can play through those at a high level. And so when you're having to take him a round plus before, a young rising quarterback like Drake May, Joe Burrow, who has his own injury concerns, but when healthy is very steady. Daniels, high ceiling. Jalen Hurts, I'm not super high on him from a real life perspective, but for fantasy, he just delivers year after year. I'm just not taking Lamar Jackson well ahead of any of those players. Swinging back around to the running back position, I want to talk about David Montgomery, who's going off the board as the consensus 502, the running back 23. He's my 601 as my running back 26. And I think Montgomery has that dead zone running back profile that you typically should look to avoid. I think for the most part, the running back dead zone is kind of dead at this point, but this is one of those archetypes that in previous years would be a pretty huge red flag, where he is a running back that is pretty solely propped up on expected volume. Now, I would be willing to draft David Montgomery if he was truly getting some of that workhorse hype. Like, there are some of these running backs out there, Breece Hall has gotten it, where the coaching staff is going out of their way to talk about how they are going to just run the rushing game through a certain player and they're going to force feed him. And for Montgomery, I think that was the upside in this offense, that he can kind of replicate the 2024 Joe Mixon type of usage. The problem is those are not the reports that we are getting. And if we were getting those, Montgomery's a veteran running back. He's had a lot of solid seasons throughout his career. He's been the running back 6, 12, 15, 16 in points per game. He's a capable pass catcher. He has handled those large workloads. But there are a lot of reports that Woody Marks is going to be fairly involved in this offense, not necessarily to a full 50-50 split, because that would just be honestly killer for both of these guys. But it kind of makes sense. Woody Marks is a good pass catcher. He's a capable runner, kind of explosive player outside the tackles. And so if this is now going to be some sort of split, like a 60-40, even 65-35 type of deal, this is an underwhelming offense with a pretty rough offensive line. And also, if Montgomery's losing out on receiving opportunities, that's also a killer, because it's receiving opportunities and goal line carries. Those are the most valuable opportunities in fantasy football. And I do look back to that 2024 Joe Mixon season, And yeah, he was super productive, 17.2 points per game, the running back 9, but he had a 78% opportunity share. That was the fifth highest at the running back position. And so I just think David Montgomery potentially splitting touches in this offense. There's not going to be any upside. I prefer Bashal Tutin, Jadarian Price straight up. I have Henderson and Montgomery back to back, but I do slightly prefer Travion Henderson at this point. And so just with some of the reporting that hasn't been super optimistic about his usage, I am pretty out on him as an early 5th round pick. Now, looking at the first wide receiver in this video, it's going to be DJ Moore. Now, I'm not crazy low on him from like a consensus ADP perspective. He's the 503, he's my 510. Just at the wide receiver position, I think there are much better options. He's the consensus wide receiver 23, he's my wide receiver 28. And I get why people are in on DJ Moore. He's in a great situation. He could be the potential number 1 target on a Josh Allen-led offense. And DJ Moore has been a super productive player throughout his career. I just think the current form of DJ Moore is pretty overrated. Like prime DJ Moore was a very, very good player. He was giving you 14 plus points per game on pretty rough Panthers offenses. He had a wide receiver 9 point per game season with the Bears with Justin Fields as his quarterback. But he is now 29 years old. He's coming off a season where he averaged 10 PPR points per game, was the wide receiver 41. And you look back at last year, it was a pretty clean run out for him. Rome Odunze was banged up throughout the season. Colston Loveland, Luther Burden didn't really emerge until later on in the year. And DJ Moore still wasn't really able to do much for that Bears offense. His efficiency has really tanked over the last couple of seasons. He's been at 1.44 and 1.22 yards per route run. His previous low was at 1.74. He's had some effort issues with the Bears. And I just think the current version of DJ Moore is no longer that wide receiver that can win and dominate from the outside. And so maybe they give him a lot of creative usage and they kind of build this passing attack around him because they're paying him a lot of money and they gave up a pretty solid draft pick to bring him in here. I do just think he has some overlapping skill sets with Khalil Shakir. And just looking at some of the other positions here, or other players, I would rather have Terry McLaurin. I would rather have Luther Burden. I would rather have Jamison Williams. I would rather have Mike Evans. I would rather have Parker Washington. So good situation. I just don't know if the talent that Moore currently has is going to carry him to this level. The Bills have also been pretty transparent on it kind of being like a next man up type of offense. They're not trying to hyper-focus on one player, and maybe that's because they haven't had someone as good as DJ Moore, and maybe now that they've really invested in him, he will be the clear-cut, number 1 target. But for me, I just trust some of those other wide receivers a little bit more, or think those guys just have some more upside. We're going to have another wide receiver here in Rome Odunze. He's someone who I've talked about a lot this offseason. I'm pretty low on him. He's the consensus 601, the wide receiver 27. He's my 606, so not a huge gap, but my wide receiver 31. Do prefer other guys at the position. Now, this is not like an anti-Bears offense take. I am very optimistic about the Bears passing attack. I really like Colston Loveland. I really like Luther Burden. I am just pretty pessimistic when it comes to Rome Odunze. He was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, but he really hasn't come close to living up to those expectations. And I think he's kind of getting a bump from this. I think Marv is still kind of getting a boost where it's like, they were really good prospects. Like, is year 3 finally the year? And maybe it is the year for these guys. But for me, I just haven't seen a ton out of Rome. Rookie year was underwhelming, 8.5 points per game, 1.18 yards per route run. Year 2, just from like a point per game perspective, was better at 12.2. But you look at the way the season played out, and he was really impressive over the first 4 games of the season. 15.7, 31.8, 15.2, 16.9 PPR points. So it was a fantastic start. It looked like he was breaking out. Then the last 10 games of the season, he averages 7.9 points per game, and he scores over 9 PPR points in just 2 of those 10. Now, he did have a week 13 stress fracture. He returned for the playoffs, wasn't super productive. But for me, it is a little bit of a red flag that the only time he was able to string together a solid stretch of games was when like Colston Loveland and Luther Burden hadn't broken out yet. And once those guys had started to emerge and enter into the offense and play well, Rome Odunze was kind of a no-show. I also think just projecting this offense here in 2026, I think a lot of people are just in on Colston Loveland. They like believe he's a true or, going to emerge as a top tier tight end going into this season. He had a dominant stretch to end the year. I have no question marks when it comes to Colston Loveland. He produced early as a rookie at a position where that's not super common. There have been some recent examples, but Loveland, I think, is just proven to be legit. Luther Burden, I know there's some more, kind of questions there. Obviously, he didn't do it from a volume perspective. His route shares were never great. But I think in this Ben Johnson offense, you can see how Luther Burden is going to be the guy who's getting those designed looks, making plays after the catch. The problem for Rome is that he is going to have to win as an X wide receiver. He is going to pretty much have to do a lot of work to get, targets and turn those into solid production. And I just struggle to see where Rome Odunze is actually a difference maker. He's been super limited after the catch so far in his career. His ball skills were pretty brutal last season, 9.4% drop rate, 35% on contested catch opportunities. And so once again, I just prefer some of these wide receivers around him. Mike Evans, Parker Washington, Christian Watson, even a guy like Carnell Tate, both kind of similar caliber of prospects. Tate just hasn't been underwhelming through 2 seasons. So I would kind of just rather re-roll on a younger top 10 wide receiver pick. The next player I would not be looking to draft is Jaylen Warren. He is the consensus 608, the running back 28. He is my 707 as my running back 30. So not a huge gap at the running back position, but pretty much a round difference in terms of overall player rankings. Now, looking at my personal ranks, I have kind of like this round 5 area. I have Bucky Irving, Cam Scattaboo, Bashal Tootin, Quinshawn Judkins, Jadarian Price, Travion Henderson, David Montgomery, all in that range. Like round 5 is a very running back heavy round for me in my rankings. But then the next running back I have after those guys is Ramondre Stevenson, a full round later in the 7th. And so just from a team building perspective, I'm not really looking for running backs in round 6. And if I, were to look for a running back there, it would be one of those guys maybe who are slipping into the 6th round. Round 6, I'm typically looking, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end. Those are the positions I'm looking to target. And I like Jaylen Warren as a player. I think he's a solid running back. He's been the running back 18, 39, and 29 over the last 3 seasons. He's efficient on the ground. I think he's a good pass catcher. He's someone who, honestly, I've wanted to see get more work in this offense over the last few years. I just think this situation is really underwhelming. This is a pretty poorly projected offense. They added wide receivers, Michael Pittman, Jeremy Bernard. I think that kind of ruins some of the Kenneth Gainwell upside he could have, where maybe if the wide receiver position was still terrible, he could have kind of emerged as Aaron Rodgers' like little pet project, where Gainwell all of a sudden just had a career year as a pass catcher. And then they add Rico Dowdle, who I just think is kind of more set up to take volume as opposed to what Kenneth Gainwell did last year. And in his career, Jaylen Warren has maxed out at a 56% opportunity share. You also look at the Vegas projections, and while I do think he'll be involved as a pass catcher, his rushing projections are just, pretty rough. He's sitting here with a 625-yard rushing over-under. I mean, you're comparing that to J.K. Dobbins, who's going, over a round later. He's higher. Blake Corum going much later is higher. Jordan Mason is higher. And then even some of the guys like Rico Dowdle, his teammate, has a higher line. Ramondre Stevenson is actually the same. Tony Pollard, 175 yards higher in terms of his projection. And so kind of all across the board, I just don't think Jaylen Warren is a super interesting pick in the 6th round. Now moving on, I believe this is the final player here. Yeah, the 8th guy in this video. it's going to be Dak Prescott. So he is the consensus 803, the QB7. He is my 907, my quarterback 12. So a pretty huge gap just in terms of like the quarterback positional ranking. And I do see the appeal of Dak Prescott. He's had multiple top 5 point per game seasons. He's a really good real life quarterback. He has great weapons. I fully expect the passing numbers to look pretty impressive out of Dak. But I just don't think he belongs in that same tier with guys like Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, because I think those guys, they're not going to be the craziest rushers, but I think with their mobility, their potential rushing production, they do have the upside to potentially be the QB1 overall. I just don't really think that's in the cards for Dak Prescott. Dak has hit 200 rushing yards in a season one time in his last six. He played a full 17-game season last year and had 177 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. I think in a peak season from Dak, he's more in like that QB3, QB4, QB5 range. And I think if Herbert or T-Law, have career years, they could be the quarterback 1, quarterback 2, quarterback 3, somewhere in there. You also look at the Vegas projections, and this is something I talked about in a recent video, but if you do want just like that pure pocket passer quarterback, why are you taking Dak when you could wait and take a guy like Stafford or Goff multiple rounds later? Looking at the Vegas projections, those two guys, Stafford and Goff, project out better from a passing perspective over Dak. Now, Dak might have a little bit more production on the ground, but I don't think it's enough to like meaningfully change anything. And so if I am taking quarterbacks in the range where Dak is being drafted, round 8, I want someone who has some juice with their legs, a Justin Herbert, a Trevor Lawrence. If I'm going to take that pocket passer archetype, I'm just going to wait a few rounds and I'm going to take a Matthew Stafford or I'm going to take a Jared Goff. I really think it's interesting that Prescott is viewed so differently from, a Stafford and Goff because it just doesn't make a ton of sense. And I mean, this is also Stafford coming off a super impressive fantasy season, and he's still not getting respect, right? He's the quarterback 15. Dak's coming off a solid season, and, he's being drafted as the quarterback 7, according to consensus. So those are the 8 players I am lower on than consensus, would not be drafting this year. To recap, Devon Achane, Cam Scadaboo, Lamar Jackson, David Montgomery, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Jalen Warren, and then finally Dak Prescott. Would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.